Welcome to this mini masterclass with Sarah Rose on using monitoring and evaluation to drive change in advocacy and campaigns. Sarah's worked for many different brilliant organisations, including Save the Children International, Oxfam, and a whole range of community organisations. A lot of Sarah's work has centred on monitoring and evaluation with a particular focus on advocacy and campaigns, and especially how to keep it really simple for campaigners and advocates. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah, on this mini masterclass. Sarah, change can be really hard to measure in advocacy and campaigns, can't it? So I know we're in really good hands with you, and we really can't wait to hear your top tips.
Thanks so much, and thanks for inviting me. Yeah, as you said, change is really messy and complicated, and sometimes measuring it feels really hard and also sometimes pointless. Hopefully you won't feel this way after the mini masterclass. But before we get started, I just want to share one really important ingredient, which is just understanding power as you go through the process. The people who get to decide on what change looks like, what decisions are made, what information is useful, hold a lot of power in the process. And when that power is shared, the process becomes a lot more meaningful to everyone involved. So 3 tips. Tip 1 is ask why you're doing it. Number 2 is be clear about how you see change happening. And number 3 is use it to learn and change.
Great. And so your first tip was ask why. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so if you're going to develop monitoring and evaluation learning, the starting point is really to think about what's the point? Why are you doing this? Is it to prove that you're making change happen, maybe for a donor, or is it to learn and get better? Think about what's most important and what is driving you in that process. It's absolutely fine if it's to fulfill contracting requirements to donors, but then just be really honest about it, because you might not want to spend as much time on it as if you are using it to learn and adjust and change your approaches.
Brilliant. And your second tip was about being really clear about how you see that change happening. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I think often there's a sort of a feeling or an assumption that monitoring and evaluation is the thing that you do at the end of the planning process. But actually, if you bring it into the beginning of the planning process and help it to test out your assumptions and how you're seeing change happen, that actually helps you to identify what it is you want to learn about. So keep asking in your planning process, how will I know if change is happening? And what will I be looking for to answer that question? Basically, the answer to that question is what you want to measure. So break your planning down into manageable chunks. Typically in campaigning work, there are about 5 types of changes you might see. They center around building partnership, policy change, public engagement. And for each of these, there's a lot of external advice out there on how you might measure them. So, for example, if you're working on coalition building, you might want to think about measuring the strength and alignment and trust between partners. Or if you're working on policy change, you might want to be measuring the access that you have to decision makers. Some of it feels really hard, but that's often the hard stuff's the most important to measure and help you learn about how change is happening. And lastly, don't be put off by the language. There is a lot of unnecessary jargon out there, and just use the words that work for you. Keep them simple.
Brilliant. Some really useful pointers there, Sarah. Thank you. And your third top tip was to learn and change. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so this seems like a bit of an obvious one, but think really carefully about how information that you're collecting is going to help you learn and what information you need. So numbers look really scientific, but very often when it comes to campaigning, they don't tell you everything that you need to know. The work in campaigning and advocacy is highly relational, and so often stories can be the best way of assessing where the change is happening. So collect all that information and then think really carefully about the conversation you want to have about the information that you're collecting. Analyze the data with questions like, What is this telling me? What are the trends? What are the blockers? What are the opportunities? And remember, lastly, that when you're working in really challenging political contexts or restricted civic space, sometimes measurement isn't about progress. It's just about ensuring that political gains are not lost and that there is public awareness of an issue. So use all of those questions and all of that information to drive learning, and then go back to the original question, which is, what's the point of the monitoring and evaluation? Is it helping you to get better? Is it not? Do you need to make adjustments to it? So in summary, be clear about why you want to do it. Be clear about how you see change happening and how you break it down, and then use that information to learn and change and go back to why you're doing it in the first place.
Wow, brilliant. Some excellent tips and insights there into really how to use monitoring and evaluation to drive change in a powerful way. Thank you, Sarah. And we ask everyone who comes on a mini masterclass to give us their reading or their listening recommendations. So could you tell us yours?
Yeah, there are so many, but I'm going to choose two. One is a paper called No Royal Road, which sets out some of the challenges really well. And then I'm going to cheat and say that if you look at the InTrack website, they have a whole host of resources on a range of monitoring and evaluation approaches, and you're sure to find something there.
Excellent. Great recommendations. Well, thank you so much for coming on this mini masterclass, Sarah. It's been great to have you.
Thanks for having me.